Rhys Davies from First Cymru, and Christopher Lay and Councillor Christopher Lay and Councillor Gavin Hill-John from Cardiff Bus, and of course our very own Mark Thomas, the Cabinet Member. Okay, so welcome all. Liz, are there any apologies?
We've received apologies from Councillor Philip Downing and Owen Williams from First Cymru.
Great, thanks very much, Liz. Are there any others that anybody knows of? No. Okay. Disclosures of interest. Ask, are there any interests you'd like to declare? And if there are any, Liz will email you a template form to complete. No, I see that as a no. The next item on the agenda is public question time. We have received 5 questions, but 3 of them are the same, basically. So I will read the 2 questions now. Actually, here we go. The first one is, gosh, it's almost an essay. In the 2011 census, Swansea had the lowest proportion of short journeys made by public transport in the whole of the UK. We have a bus network that does little more than take people to a shopping mall that has increasingly fewer shops, which less and less people want to go. It costs £2 to park in the city centre all day, yet costs £5 for one person to go there by bus. It costs £4 to park in Mumbles and for 3 hours, yet costs £5 for one person to go there by bus. Most of the city does not have direct bus services to the train station or the Liberty Stadium on match days. We need direct bus services that link different parts of the city. We need to move away from the idea that all buses must go to the quadrant. Every year since 1978, the Netherlands has carried out a nation travel survey. Citizens are asked to record each journey they take, and this information is used to help ensure viable alternatives to travelling by car are provided. Rather than focusing on the experience of bus users, the council should switch its focus to the vast majority who are not bus users and determine what changes are required for more people to choose public transport. We need the council to conduct a survey to assess what services residents actually need and to commit to providing competitive alternatives to car travel while setting out targets to increase the number of people using buses and active travel and targets to reduce the number of car journeys on our roads. I said it was a long question. Would anybody like to tackle that now? It's probably Mark. It's Councillor Mark Thomas.
Yes, I'm happy to have a go at it, Chair. It's probably not just me that. I don't know if Jane Rhys Davies wants to make a contribution on behalf of First, but yeah, certainly on the. I mean, the comment does say, as you said, it's a lengthy question, so require a bit of an answer. The bus journeys, of course, that go into the city centre are run on a commercial basis predominantly and predominantly supplied by First, but they're not there just to take people into the shops. I mean, there may, even if there is a decline in the shopping presence in Swansea, many people, choose the bus to go into Swansea for work purposes. They commute by bus, so it's not, you don't get the full picture just looking at the situation on what the shopping offer is in Swansea. There's more to it, and an awful lot of people take it for work journeys, and I'm sure Jane has more of the detail and facts and figures of the people who use the buses and the reasons for. They would predominantly lie with her. But I mean, also the comparison on the parking charges is a little bit, not unfair, but it's a little bit tainted in the fact that the prices quoted are, as we're all aware, that's because of a parking offer we've got on at the moment to encourage people to go back into the city centre and to use the city centre and to support the businesses in the city centre through this pandemic period and the recovery period. So the £2 for all day parking in Swansea, for example, is very much a temporary thing. It's a measure we put in to aid the recovery programme. It's not a long term, and it hasn't been there. I'm trying to think when we brought it in. It was earlier this year, I think we brought it in around, well, I can't quite remember the date, but it was certainly earlier this year, and it is still there as a temporary measure. And the same for the offer in Mumbles, that is a temporary measure as well. So we will see that changed as and when we feel comfortable enough that people are, I'm not going to use the words getting back to normal, but as the recovery progresses, then that subsidy of reduced parking charges will change. So it's not a true comparison to compare that with bus journeys at this time. The bit about most of the cities that not have direct bus services to the train station or Liberty Stadium on match day. Well, I'm not quite sure of the provision of the buses is really because they're done predominantly on a commercial basis. The bus companies run the buses where the demand is. I mean, and again, there'd be an opportunity for Jane to come in more on this. It's you try not to put bus journeys on that people don't want. You tend to predominate bus journeys around where the demand is and make a match between supply and demand. But I'm sure Jane will come in more on that. I don't know about the survey. It said this is a nationwide survey carried out in the Netherlands. I'm not saying it's something we can't or shouldn't do. And there is probably, we have the current journeys that are carried out would give us a roadmap of the type of journeys that people want to make. The other bit then about focusing on bus users. We are, as everyone knows, probably got the most funding of any authority in Wales to improve and increase our active travel routes throughout and across Swansea. For that very purpose, many of you would have heard me say that we need to make a modal shift from the total reliance that people have on cars into other forms of transport, active travel and bus. Public transport included in that. It's something we are driven to do. It's something, pardon the pun, it wasn't intended. It's something we are intended to do, and it's something that we are doing it, despite, as we know, in some quarters, some opposition to this. But it's the right thing to do. And it's not just about today. This is future-proofing us, because we can't carry on with the over-reliance on cars, and particularly for short journeys and that. But in order to get people out of their cars, and I've repeatedly said this, we need to provide the alternatives there to a car. So yes, I mean, as says in the report, we have maintained. I mean, not all the bus services are on a commercial basis. We'll come into that later on the report. I think about 80% are. The rest are something that we, as an authority, choose to maintain, where they are not affordable on a commercial basis. And to be fair to this authority, we've maintained that subsidy for the bus services throughout the last years, not just through the pandemic and well before that. We have seen the importance of that, and we have chosen to maintain that level of subsidy. So, I mean, I don't know what else I can add to that question, Chair, but I'm sure there's others. Certainly Jane, Kath, Swain and Stewart from Transport are here as well, and I don't know, they may want to offer or add something to it if I haven't missed any key points, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Jane, would you like to add anything, or?
I would. Firstly, can I thank you for inviting myself along to this meeting. It's very refreshing that you've invited us and want us to share our experience with you. So firstly, can I thank you for that? Similar to Councillor Thomas's point, really, in terms of the cost illustrated in the question is not correct. And actually, there are many incentives we provide to regular passengers that mean the more tickets you buy, you can actually get much more competitive pricing tickets. So that can be the worst case scenario. I guess the challenge is, without knowing the specific area that this question has been positioned from, we have many services which go across the city. One of our most most prominent services is the Service 25. If anyone's familiar, it comes from Blaen y Maes through to the city. The stops in a number of terminus points on its way. It stops at the train station. It stops at the Kingsway. I think we have to be realistic. Some of the spots we have to stop at can get very congested. So it's important we recognise that the train station has a high volume of traffic. We couldn't run every bus through those points, but I'd be keen to understand the concern of the person who raised the question, to understand more about where they where they are travelling from, to be able to clearly define the points of service. In terms of Mark's point about the commuters, through the pandemic, it was very clear to us that we carry a lot of retail workers. There were a number of retail outlets open throughout the pandemic, and we were carrying those deemed as essential workers, as well as people in the care industry and people in hospitals. One of our major services is the services that runs between Singleton Hospital and Morriston. So there are a number of services that don't directly go into the Quadrant bus station for shopping purposes. And I'm sure we've got very sophisticated software that shows us the use of bus stops across the city, that if you wanted us to share a little bit more information about where people are travelling within the city, I'd be more than happy to do that. Very challenging to do it in this forum, but I would be happy to pull together some data which may help you on that position. I do agree with Councillor Thomas, though. We do need to see modal shift. Our city is probably one of the most congested cities that I experience in my travels around Wales. And given the Welsh Government's agenda on climate change, I think we do all need to take responsibility for trying to move people into public transport. The one challenge we have is, as an industry, it has diminished. You know, the number of people now travelling by bus has reduced dramatically. Every decade we see a diminishing market, and particularly the younger generation aren't travelling by bus. Many have their own vehicles, and to deal with the climate agenda, modal shift is required. And we do all we can to contribute to improving our vehicles, getting the most efficient vehicles, using technology on our vehicles to improve the climate agenda. But there is a huge risk in Wales, because some of the countries, Scotland is a prime example, where they have put a lot of vehicle investment into improving the climate agenda, which we haven't wholly started in Wales. It is on the agenda and we are making strides, but we need to move forward a little bit more progressively, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you. The steward or Kath want to make any comment, or you'd like to come in under your report?
Just really to add to what Councillor Thomas was saying, really. I mean, first of all, sort of say in terms of the work that's ongoing as an authority, as a region, looking at a metro, working along with Welsh Government and Transport for Wales as well. It's a really strong commitment in terms of for that modal shift to really high quality sort of public transport. So there's early development work going on there to really see how we can get proper integration between modes, integration between ticketing, how we get that sort of as I say, real step change in how public transport's viewed. So there's a lot of work underway aside from what goes on from looking at how, say, congestion points. We work with First and other operators to deal with some of the challenges on the network on a regular basis. And I guess secondly, in terms of active travel, is the council's got an extremely strong commitment and fully supported in terms of the cabinet active travel. And as Councillor Thomas said, we've punched well above our weight in terms of not just the region but Wales in terms of the money that's been secured for active travel improvements. And I think it's really important that everyone gets behind that sort of move. You know, we saw some examples in terms of, you know, what should have been fairly straightforward. The Pentra Road Bridge in Gravesend was a good example where, you know, what we were trying to do was provide some, you know, safe space for pedestrians to use a route, and the resistance, everyone could see the sort of, there was a resistance coming through in terms of against that, which obviously, you know, those are things that we collectively need to work towards changing the hearts and minds and getting support behind those schemes. But you know, active travel has got that really strong prominence, and we've got, you know, hopefully a good stream of bids to really make that a really good viable alternative ahead. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A question to Jane, really, on the question that was written in by the member of the public who challenged the costings. You said as well that the company offers, you know, incentive discounts in a sense. So are you implying to perhaps weekly or monthly tickets, but also can you give any examples if you also offer any off-peak daily discount tickets?
Thank you, Councillor White. So in terms of perhaps someone who would buy a daily ticket, we have a mobile app which you can use on a phone, which saves you actually purchasing a ticket on the bus. There are many incentives for buying volume. So if you bought 5 tickets, for example, then you could purchase, you'd get a discount in advance. In terms of off-peak, no, we don't tend to have off-peak offerings on bus, but that's not to say it isn't something we wouldn't look at. Fares and ticketing is very complex because of the range of areas we cover. But you know, we're always open-minded to looking at our ticket offering, particularly in terms of enhancing the number of customers who choose to travel by bus.
Yeah, you know, why I raise that is obviously, you know, it is an incentive if you bought a weekly or a monthly, but I think the people that might only have to go into the city centre perhaps or on another journey perhaps once or twice a week for work or something.
Yes, so as I say, there are ways of buying multiple tickets at discounted rates, and the example I had is our day ticket, which costs £4.70. If someone purchased that on a mobile app, they would be saving almost £1 by buying multiple tickets. So there are incentives, and perhaps not all customers are wholly aware of those incentives, but they are definitely there.
Yeah, but as I say, you know, and being devil's advocate, plus not everybody has got access to a mobile app, and plus, you know, if the sort of a offer is there, you can get it on that by purchasing that. Why can't it be offered when people board the bus?
Yeah, and there will probably be incentives that you can do on bus. The simplest one is through the mobile app.
Okay, perhaps we can pursue that when we following the presentations. Great, thank you. The next question is it's relating to the number 14 Penarth to Swansea bus. This they say this is our only bus service with direct link to Swansea. It is important that it is regular and if late does not miss coming through Bishopston and Merton. And the individual says, I was waiting in Bishopston recently, no bus appeared, but a friend of hers was able to pick the bus up on the mails, which was on time. Obviously, the driver decided not to take the Bishopston loop. We should have an hourly service which takes in the hospital and on all journeys and is reliable and is as punctual as possible. I think looking at that, I think it's Jane, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I know the Service 14 is something that that we have a lot of feedback on. I guess my first observation is, you know, if the bus is expected, it should be expected on time, and I wouldn't expect any of our drivers to miss parts of the route out. So it would be interesting to have the detail on that so we could fully investigate that particular concern. I guess what I would say about the Service 14, and I've had a look at it in a little bit more detail, it's one of the services that actually isn't covering covering its costs, and that's the challenge we have as a commercial operator. When I looked at the information yesterday, and I won't give you too much detail because some people may not want to know all the detail. I'll just give us a summation of it. When I looked at the detail, it isn't actually covering the cost of our drivers' time, let alone the cost of a vehicle, fuel and maintenance. And that's not even looking at the potential of profit. So I'll omit that word because that is a contentious word. But in terms of our ability to run that service to cover its own costs, it presently isn't. So what I would say is we either need to look at increasing the patronage of the vehicle, or we need to look at how we offer that service in a different way. And there are many examples now of us being much more innovative in how passenger transport is being considered. And I'd like to look at this service in a little bit more detail and look to see whether a service bus in its current guise is the best solution for the Service 14. And I don't think it's something we can resolve today, but I would be committed to work with the local authority to look at alternative solutions to that particular proposition, and see if we can have an improved offering for the customer that is that meets the demand and the cost implications to the company.
Great, thank you. Perhaps I could meet outside this meeting because the number 14 bus is very dear to me. Right, Councillor Mark Thomas.
Yeah, as Jane has clarified, I mean, this is a commercial service, so indirectly it has nothing to do with the authority, but we never take that approach, and we've got a very good working relationship with all of the transport companies in Swansea. And I can't remember the detail of it, Chair, but it must have been about 2 years ago, and Jane's predecessor, Andrew Shendon, was in charge of the buses at the time. And we were made aware, I think, from members of the public, perhaps by yourself, ward councillors were involved some way, about the first plan to change the bus service, the number 14. And from what I can remember, and Kath is got a far better memory than me, and maybe she or not want to come in, but certainly the proposed changes initially to this service, because as what Jane said then, it wasn't profitable then. I don't believe it was, perhaps that's not a word people like to hear, but it was not covering its costs at that time. And I'd say it must be 2 years ago. And the proposed changes from First at that time were for further reductions than what's currently there now. And for our part, we did sit down with First and looked at alternative options to still be able to provide that service as best you could. So although I can see from the questions that a lot of people are not comfortable, for example, the fact that it doesn't always go into the hospital on part of its journey. The original proposals were that none of the journeys went into via the hospital. They all went straight down Oystermouth Road. And with our intervention, and of course not just me, but obviously our transport officers have got a tremendous working relationship. We sat down with Andrew and we're able to compromise. Now, today you can look at a service, you can say it's not as good as it used to be, but with working together with First on this, we were able to not to go to that stage or that step and protect the service from perhaps more severe cuts at the time. And in the hope, and the hope was that, increased patronage would come in and then make the service much more viable. It sounds from what Jane have just said that may still be an issue of lack of patronage, but it's certainly something we take, although it's not directly within our control to lay on the services, but it's definitely within our way, because we always discuss any of these changes when any of the transport companies say they're going to make changes. We always will try to meet with them to try and alleviate the suffering or displacement that anybody has. But that's our role. That's what we are proud to do and happy to do on behalf of the residents of Swansea. Sometimes it can't always be done because it's just, that there is no, it's beyond anybody's reach. But the point I was trying to make is that we don't just sit by when changes are made and just accept those changes. We will always try to soften the impact they have on local residents.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly, I made representations to Andrew Sherrington at the time, and of course to yourself, and we had a number of conversations about it. As I know, the next speaker has an next person with a question, and that's Councillor Linda James. Linda.
Right, thank you. First of all, can I just ask that if there's any meetings or discussions concerning the number 14, that I'm also involved in them and not missed out, because this is the only bus that comes to Pennard. I'd just like to say that I know many of the constituents and residents locally, predominantly older people, have given up using the bus because they find the timetable confusing. It's changed because it's an hour and a half, it keeps changing, and the route it changes on each journey. So whatever we have, it's got to be regular. So they haven't got to keep looking it up. They know what the time is, when they pick it up, when they can pick it up back at the quadrant or wherever. That's all, thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Jane, did you want to respond? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor James. That is helpful to understand. And as I guess I said a little earlier, we have the customer numbers. We carry in about 8 customers per trip. It's about 130 per day. In terms of your point, Councillor James, about the regularity, I appreciate over the last 16 or 17 months, our bus services haven't been regular because we've been working within the pandemic, and that has been a very challenging situation for our customers. It's been a challenging situation for us to be able to communicate with customers, but I am committed when we come out of the restrictions and we're in a clear position on the bus service that we want to run in the future, that we will improve how we communicate with the customer, because I agree with you entirely. Timetables are a complex thing to get your head around at regular times, but whilst we've been in the pandemic, it's been even more so. So I take on board that point, and any future discussions we have, whoever is pertinent to be part of those discussions, I'd welcome their input, because from my position, in growing the customer numbers on all our services is very important to me.
Great, thanks. I think we've done the public question time, and the next item on the agenda is the presentations. Can I suggest we listen to the presentation by First Cymru, Cardiff Bus, and the bus services report, and then we go to discussion and questions after. So could I call on First Cymru to make their presentation?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Just bear with me, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you should be able to see that. If you could confirm that, Councillor Jones, that would be very helpful.
Yes, I can. Yes, I think we can.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much. Well, thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today. Hopefully I haven't provided too much information. It's just an overview really of our business. So those who don't know me, as I say, my name's Jane Reeks-Davis. I've worked in First for about 8 years, and I've been the managing director for 12 months. I had the I call it the opportunity to take over the position of managing director the week we went into lockdown last year. So it was a very challenging time, and we shrunk the business to a quarter of its size to operate through the first part of the pandemic. So it was a real baptism of fire, but it's hopefully now we've seen some of the restrictions ease and we can get back to business as usual. So let me just give you a bit of a background to First Cymru. In this area, we are one of the largest bus operators, and we're very committed to being part of the region we work in South and West Wales. We employ 700 people in this business, all who live in the area, delivering bus services across our depots. Within the Swansea area, we operate 131 buses, which means we maintain them, we have our drivers drive them, and we operate those right across the towns and cities in the region, amounting to 6.5 million miles per annum. Across First Cymru, across the Swansea business, we employ 400 staff. That includes drivers, engineers, and a number of support staff, with our head office based in Penlan. As a company, we contribute to the economy of this area through our people, through that 400 staff in this area and the 700 elsewhere. But it has been a very challenging year. As I say, I took the business on at a particularly difficult time. I didn't think we would be heading into a pandemic. But actually, we've brought something really good to the city this year, and some people were able to celebrate that with us. And that is, we brought the sun. We launched our open top services, and you may see some familiar faces there, as Councillor Thomas helped us launch the coaster service with 2 open top buses operating across the coastline into Mumbles. And I really think they brought a little bit of sunshine into what has been a very difficult year for many people. And so far, it's doing what we wanted to. It's brought some smiles to some faces, and hopefully it shows that we've been investing in the city, and we plan to do that even more. So what do we have across the Swansea bus network? Well, as Councillor Thomas indicated earlier, we are a commercial operator. And yes, that does mean we do need to make a profit, but that profit is there to reinvest in vehicles, reinvest in our people. We're very committed to the people who work within our business, and that's what we do. So the commercial services we operate are in the main fully commercial services. We do have some part tendered and sub-tendered services, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So across our network, we operate through most of the major towns in the area: Swansea, Carmarthen, Llanelli, Neath, Port Talbot, up to Powys, Bridgend and Cardiff. And most of our network crosses the boundary of those cities. Across our network, we have a number of people who access the concessionary card scheme, and I would say at the moment that's probably 50% of our customers. We'll talk about the concessionary card scheme in a little bit more detail. I'm sure Kath's report is going to cover this off, but thought it would be helpful to set out the services which are tendered and are contributed financially by the local authority. And you can see those there: the service 24, the 7, 44, 15 and 30. But pretty much everything else is wholly commercial and is funded from the revenue from those services. So for those who are familiar with the concessionaries card scheme, it's probably one of the best used services in the bus industry in Wales. It's available to all residents that are aged 60 or over or have disabilities. And what it does mean is that bus operators receive a fixed contribution to the fare. So interestingly, and we were talking about this with colleagues in the last few days, you know, the price is fixed. It doesn't matter where you travel from. So someone could catch a bus on the Kingsway and head to the Quadrant, and we would have the same value back through the scheme as someone who caught a bus from the Quadrant and decided to travel to Cardiff for the day. So those rates are fixed by the Welsh Government and are administered through the local authority, and we claim that back through the local authority. So as I indicated shortly in showing the picture of the Cymru coaster, we launched our open top services, and we've had nice refurbished vehicles to share with the customers, and hopefully bring in some tourists to the area who may not have travelled by bus. We all know that Mumbles is a congested corridor, well-used corridor within our business. So this, we feel, is something that we've given back to that area for people to enjoy the experience of travelling on an open top bus and seeing the fantastic views we have to offer across Mumbles. We have extended our services into the evening because through the pandemic, of course, we had reduced services. So we're now pretty much back to having later journeys, and our network at night now is pretty much the same every evening. So most people have a clear understanding of when we're operating in the evenings. If you've had some feedback already, from the 21st of June, we have increased the capacity on vehicle, because before that we were only able to carry 50% of customers because of the legal restrictions put in place on social distancing. The legislation is still there to protect social distancing, but in agreement with the Welsh Government, we have now increased our capacities to provide more seats to customers, because we were finding examples on a frequent basis where we were leaving people behind, and that isn't something we felt comfortable doing as operators. And as that was the case, all operators have worked with the Welsh Government to resolve that problem. So just I'll just leave that a second for you to just see the number of customers we carry across the city. So pre-COVID, when we look at the number of passengers that we carried on bus across the city area, we were carrying 194,000 people before the pandemic, and now we're carrying 98,000 people. So as you can see, we are still only carrying half the people we did before the pandemic. And my concern is that that is going to be a long-standing position, which will make bus services more challenging to sustain. Although we are heading in the right direction, from this slide you can see that we have had an improving picture since we've eased restrictions, but we have a long way to go to be carrying the number of customers we did pre-COVID. And it is important that we highlight that and the risk to the bus industry if we cannot sustain or see a growth in patronage moving forward. So as I said earlier in one of the questions, we have a very sophisticated app for customers to use, which has been vital through the pandemic, because it has highlighted to people where we've had capacity on bus. It shows the customer the number of seats available, and that has been really important, that we've been able to share that and encourage people to get on bus at times when they may feel more at ease, because I appreciate some people may have felt uncomfortable travelling by bus, but they may have had no alternative. You know, for many of our customers, they don't have any other option than to get on our vehicles. And that's important that we've recognised that and shared our capacity by bus, by route. And that is just an illustration of the app that is in place. It's as I say, it's been very important to share detail about capacities on bus with customers. As we talked earlier, one of the biggest challenges for the bus industry is climate change, and I think the Welsh Government have given a clear message by having a portfolio minister who's responsible for climate change, someone on our patch, which is very helpful to us in Julie James being member of the Senedd for that portfolio, but also the Deputy Minister, Lee Waters, who has made it very clear that he wants to see change in how bus companies operate. But of course, the challenge of that is that we need to have investment in improving vehicle types and moving people out of their own cars and onto bus. And that little image there says 1,000 words, really, that one bus can take 75 cars off the road. If you think about that across our area, when I sit in the bus station and watch the number of vehicles on the road, how we could do much better as a bus company if we could see a reduction in some of the vehicles on the road, because it would move our buses much more quickly, and there'll be a real incentive then for someone to jump on the bus rather than to be in a car. So that has to be our commitment. Now, across First Bus, which my company is part of the family of, First Bus have made a commitment that by 2035 it will have a clean air fleet. So they will be, all the vehicles operated by First will be a zero emission, and there's been a commitment not to buy any more diesel vehicles after 2025. So we really put our flag on the post to say we are going to operate as a clean air operator. As Stuart alluded to earlier, we've been in discussions around corridors in the city to look at investing in alternative vehicles, and I welcome any opportunity to work with Welsh Government around improving the clean air agenda. And it's a joint problem as I see it. I mean, there's 1,900 buses carrying customers across Wales. Many bus companies wouldn't have the ability to purchase all those vehicles. So it's important that we all work in partnership with each other to maximise the use of the private sector and the leverage that the public sector has to help in such an important strategy for Wales. That's pretty much it for my presentation, but of course I'm open to any questions if anyone has anything.
Yeah, what I suggested was we listen to the three presentations, Jane, and then come back with questions.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Great, excellent. Could I ask Councillor Christopher Lay and Councillor Gavin Hill-John to do the presentation for Cardiff Bus?
Yeah, I'll work on sharing the screen while Chris says hello.
Hi everyone, so my name's Chris Lay. I'm the chair of Cardiff Bus, which is a municipal bus company which runs throughout Cardiff, and also we head out to Newport as well. My colleague who's with me at the moment, Councillor Gavin Hill-John, is the deputy chair of the bus company. Gav is going to run through the presentation with yourselves. So I'm going to hand it over to him, and obviously we'll be happy to answer any questions after all the presentations. Cheers.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we felt that Chris's Birmingham accent was a bit too much for everybody this afternoon, so he passed the baton to me. So I thought we'd keep this nice and simple this afternoon, and we just wanted to go through very quickly who are we, how it works, the challenges we have, the benefits and the future for Cardiff Bus, because obviously we operate on a different model to what you've got in Swansea, and I hope this afternoon we can add some value to your discussions and share some of the things that we have found out in Cardiff. So who we are, Cardiff Bus has been around since 1902. We've been a wholly standalone company since 1986, and we're the principal bus operator in Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. Over 200 buses and almost 600 staff. In normal times, we require 186 buses to be on the road every single day. You know, as Jay's already said, in terms of the COVID pandemic, we're running at similar numbers there as well as First. So that's obviously reduced, but we're working towards getting that back up. In 2019, 2020, we run about 10.7 million kilometres and carried about 24 million passengers on our network. So as you can see, we are quite a big operation in the capital of South of Wales. So how does it work? Well, we are a private limited company, but Cardiff Council is our sole shareholder. And deregulation in October 1986 means that we have to act as an independent company. We can't be run by Cardiff Council as such. So the Transport Act of 1985 and 2000 provide us with a legal framework that we have to adopt and keeps everything in line with the policies and the legalities of things. We have to be profitable as a business, but we are not there to be profit maximizing. So our goals are not to make as much profit as we can. You know, the council is the shareholder, and clearly we have to deliver a return for them, but it's not a question of how much can we make for our shareholder. And the other significant difference, which really is something I'll focus on shortly as well, is our board of directors. So we've got the operating board, made up of the managing director and his team. But we have our executive board includes 2 independent non-executive directors. So we have 2 people from outside the bus community who provide steerage and advice, as well as 5 councillors who act as non-executive directors. And I think one of the principal differences you noticed today is both Chris and myself are actually county councillors, and we carry out this role on behalf of the shareholder. So we're in position to make sure that there's a good relationship between the shareholder and the limited company as well. And that provides us with a huge opportunity. It does provide us with some challenges, as we'll see now going forward. So what are our main challenges? So the main challenges of this model, the first one is we have some very challenging financial constraints. So unlike other commercial operators, we are very restricted in where we can raise finance from. So we have to use our shareholder, which then brings in all sorts of questions around state aid. And it's a very difficult balance sometimes in terms of where can we raise money to invest in the business. So this is part of the reason why we still need to make a profit. We can't be wholly subsidized because we have to fund ourselves as we go through. The other challenges we have, people may think, well, if we're owned by Cardiff Council, we get preferential treatment. Well, we don't. And the council highway and infrastructure improvements can hinder all operators in Cardiff. And if you've seen recent press, you go to Wales Online and Castle Street, you'll see that the decisions made by the council wasn't one that we wanted as a bus organisation. So even though the perception might be that we can get what we want, we can't, and it hinders all of the operators as well when decisions are made at a local authority level. We do still have, because it was a former wholly owned company under the Local Authorities Act, we still have some legacy issues around pensions and things like that, which again, without going into too much detail, cause us some issues, and we have to work through those. Also in Cardiff, we're in a very unusual position, but it's very similar, I suppose, to First in Swansea. We are the principal operator, and there are very strict anti-competition rules. So all of the decisions we make in terms of our marketing, our strategies, the routes, we have to take into account the anti-competition rules very, very seriously, because we are the dominant operator in the city. And another challenge is, although we are an independent company and we make our own decisions, we're not perceived as independent by the public, or in some cases, by our own employees as well, those who've been with us for a long time. So again, that can cause a few issues for us. But there are plenty of things that make this a really, really positive relationship and a really good solution for the capital city of Wales. Number one, we do get to be at the table at local authority discussions and with Welsh Government as well. We do get to, with the council involvement, so between Chris and myself and the other councillors, we are able to have very robust discussions with Cardiff Council, which does help to look at possible solutions going forward. The fact that we've got councillors on the board of the company means that our public, so the people that vote for us, the people we represent, have a voice on the transport network in Cardiff. And we have, every time we make a decision about a route, you can be guaranteed that one of the 76 councillors we work with are going to make comment on that, but they've got direct access to board members, and we can therefore really answer those questions, and we can take into account the views of residents much more than we'd be able to in other circumstances. And that then leads us to the fact that because we're non-profit maximising, we just literally need to make a profit. We're able to serve the city, and that defines what we're trying to do. That defines the vision for the company. We're there to serve the city and to provide as many opportunities as we can for residents to use buses, and therefore save on climate change and all of those other things that we can do. The other thing that, a couple more points on what really helps us to work is we're held to the public sector standards, and we all know that the perception of the public sector is it's heavily laden with red tape, and it's very unwieldy and it's not very agile, but there are benefits to the fact that we are part of that and we hold ourselves to those standards. And in addition to that, this can be a double-edged sword. As we said earlier, one of the challenges about not being perceived as independent is a challenge, but on the flip side of that, we do have some strong reputational advantage through our association with the council. We are trusted in effect by the public because they think we're part of that Cardiff network and that Cardiff society. So that makes a huge difference as well. And then as we move on to, and again, I said I didn't want to keep this as short as possible because I'd love to get into your questions later on. And just so you'll know, Chris may have to drop off before we get to the questions, but I'll be staying with you as long as you need me this afternoon to answer any questions you have. What are we going to do going forward? Well, as we've already heard from First as well, we're committed to climate change and improving what we do. We've already ordered our 36 fully electric buses. They'll be on the streets of Cardiff before the end of this year. We're really excited about that. We're also upgrading our fleet to make sure the rest of our buses are either Euro 5, Euro 6 or electric. We are heavily investing in looking at alternative technologies as well, and we're keeping our options open going forward as to what will be the best options for there. We're making it as simple as possible for people to use our services, so we're looking at fare capping. We've already explored as well a relationship with Newport Bus, so the connecting the two cities in single fares, which I know is something that is a big challenge for the public transport sector in Wales, but again, we're very much keen to explore that and work together. And one of the biggest things we're looking forward to doing and what we want to do is we're here to help Cardiff deliver its local development plan, and we're also here to help Cardiff deliver the Transport White Paper and its green ambitions. So we're an integral part, and we want to be an integral part of the transport strategy for Cardiff. And I mean, as you've already seen, it's a staggering number when you think one full bus can take 75 cars off the road. And that's what we're determined to do. So we're trying to influence as much as we can to make sure that we are influencing the whole transport strategy for Cardiff. And it's something that's worked very well for us. As I said, there are some challenges. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions after we've heard from the next presenter. So I will hopefully stop sharing my screen now. Back to you, Lyndon.
Thanks, Chris and Gavin. And the next presentation is from the Bus Services Report, and that's Councillor Mark Thomas, Martin Nichols, Stuart Davis and Kath Swain. I don't know who wants to lead.
Yeah, I'll present. If Kath can, Kath, I think you've all had the report, but I think if you like to be consistent, if Kath can put it up on the screen, and we can follow the same format as the previous two presenters then.
Great, thank you.
Can you see that?
No.
No.
Oh, right, okay, hang on. Share.
Technology takes its toll.
I know, it does, doesn't it? Oh, hang on. Doesn't seem to want to share. Hang on. No. Right, share screen, share content. No.
Yes.
No.
No.
You've got first bus.
No, I can't find it.
Want to email it to Liz and she can put it up perhaps?
Yeah, I'm just trying to swoop in there. No, I can't find it. I'll email it to Liz then, okay? I don't know if Councillor Thomas wants to start or I don't want me to do that.
Okay, yeah, well, while everybody's finding the method to be able to share it, I mean, obviously, the benefit of sharing it, I suppose, is for, Cardiff Bus and for First who wouldn't have seen it possibly, but all councillors on the call would have seen it, and I suppose sharing it will help with any members of the public who are listening or watching. I suppose it's quite interesting, isn't it? We've seen a presentation from First who operate under a commercial setting, and then a totally different presentation from Cardiff Bus, which again is there's nothing more chalk and cheese than the two presentations, and the position we are in is obviously not in the same position of Cardiff Bus, and that as yet. Oh, it is. Thanks, Liz. That's great.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. I think I can see it. I can assume.
Yeah, no, it's up on screen.
Yeah. Right. if you could scroll down a bit, Liz, please.
There we are. It's me. I'm doing it now.
Oh, Kath is doing it, is it right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to it. But yeah, just to finish that point, it's I suppose everybody looking at the Cardiff bus presentation are quite envious of what they're able to do, and maybe that's the future for us, I suppose. But it's not something we're at the moment, and I'm sure we can talk more about that and the reasons why and the rationale throughout the rest of the afternoon. Yeah, the interesting point on us, the legislation, as I won't go through the whole report because I know for councillors they'll have seen it, but I'm going to try and pick up and focus on the parts that some of the questions that have been fed in are linked to in our report. So in doing that, I maybe will answer some of the questions before we get to the question times. But as it says here on 1.2, the legislation gives local authorities powers to financially support. So we've got the commercial operation, which is done and has been talked about by Jane. But what are we as a local authority able to do as an authority? And I think the next couple of paragraphs catches that. So 1.2 talks about legislation gives us as local authorities powers to financially support bus services which they consider to be socially necessary. The local authorities monitor the bus network provided commercially by operators and identify gaps. So where commercial operators cannot run a commercial service or have been unable to or can't sustain a commercial service, that's generally where we are able to come in and consider providing fundings available to look to take on that or support that route through a subsidised method. We aren't always able to do it, but we do try and endeavour to do that. And there are many examples of where we've been able to do that. So the question may be about how do we choose routes that we subsidise? Well, we don't choose them as such. They end up coming to our doorstep on the ability where commercial operators who were running a route through lack of patronage, for example, as was talked about, we are then perhaps faced with the challenge of, is that something that the council could afford to do on a subsidised basis? So that's the method about how these routes generally come into being. There's obviously requests come in as well, but generally it's because of current routes that are no longer financially viable for a commercial operator to run. The majority, as it says here, the majority of bus services are operated commercially, and First is by far the biggest proponent of those services, biggest supplier of those services, to the extent of about 80% of our services are commercial, and that leaves 20% that we provide. And ours are mainly in the more rural areas where there's less direct connections and things like that. So it's where journeys are less regular, footfall or patronage is much lower, and these routes are not the easiest to operate on a commercial basis. So that's where we tend. So as I said, they're not there by accident. They're there by design, really. The fact that they are not high usage routes, they are remote routes, does not generally make them commercially viable, and that's where the council come in. So it's no coincidence that the more outlying areas tend to be predominantly what we subsidise. We have rules over, we can't just operate, we have to offer the route out to tender and give all the operators a chance to run it on a commercial basis, but through our subsidies. 2.4 all contract vehicles, we have measures which we put on the operators to make sure that the buses have got a relatively young fleet that are operated. We don't want old broken down vehicles operating our fleets because of reliability, and not least of all the environmental effects of old buses running on our roads and highways. The other part of because most people think that the only subsidies we do and help we give is for bus services, and that's not the case, as is your community transport. Many of you will be aware, because many of these community transports operate within your areas, your wards and your areas of the city, and they are these really are a lifeline to many people. Now although they are a community transport and they're a subsidised transport system, they operate really on a different theme, because the buses is to get people in and out of Swansea or in two key locations. The car schemes, which are mostly car schemes, apart from Dancer, operate really to take people to the hospital visits, doctors, and things like that. They more sort of journeys, not of convenience, but of indirect journeys, and very often short journeys, and they're operated generally by volunteers, with the exception of the dancer scheme. The dancer scheme is different. It's a different format. It's set up. It's a fleet of minibuses, and they're paid drivers, and they operate again on a commercial basis. But and then further down, then we have another scheme where two operators operate and manage that. But these are again two services, sorry, not two operators, where they basically take people to the shopping centres and that to do shopping, and they're a very well used service. They're based on people have to phone up and book because they are very popular, and so you have a time limit at which you have to book a seat on, and they are door-to-door services as well, so ideal for people with poor mobility, elderly, etc. They literally will pick you up at the door, take you shopping, and then bring you back to the door with your shopping. So they're a very, very valued service, and something that we are glad as an authority that we can help provide for residents of Swansea. So I mean, we go on to the funding, as I touched on earlier on, and I know, £1.6 million we afford to subsidise the buses and transport schemes, and we have maintained that subsidy. We haven't reduced it, unlike the pressures that some authorities, unfortunately, have had to do because of budget cuts and reductions over the years. That is something that has been looked at, but we have defended that and maintained that subsidy throughout. So, that's something we are proud of, because we have come under pressure, like all of our budgets across the whole of, not just Swansea, in every local authority. But that's something I'm proud to say that we've maintained, and so that we haven't had to reduce any of the provision of subsidised bus services and transport schemes throughout Swansea. So I think, Chair, that's really about the key points I wanted to cover. As I said, it's not just that transport, because as I said, people think of subsidised transport. Oh, there's one bit at the bottom, thanks, Kath, that I do want to touch on. The subsidised transport system, people always think of bus, and that is the biggest part of our subsidy, and that's the biggest support we give. But rest assured that these community transport schemes, and I know there's a lot of us councillors and our communities benefit from them, they are really, really important, and equally important to the users of those. Serve a different purpose, but as equally as much of a needed and well needed service. The other one then that I wanted to finish on is future arrangements. The Welsh Government were planning and were making progress to introducing changes for the coming years. Because of the pandemic, and around the time of the pandemic, a lot of the progress they were making, they put a hold on that, pending further investigations and discussions. And so, for example, local authority run buses is one of them. That isn't progressing at the moment. So I know it was one of the questions there, why can't we run a local authority bus service just like Cardiff Bus do? That's not something that the legislation is not in place for us to be able to do that currently. Kath will have more detail on that, and she's much more up to the detail of it. But I know that at that moment, and I know it was one of the questions there, that isn't something that we as a local authority could do, even if we wanted to at the moment. So, as I said, the pandemic, what's changed as well is, now the Welsh Government are working very closely with Transport for Wales and looking at integrated transport, and I know that one of the key things that will be looked at as a result of this review and the involvement of Transport for Wales is this cross-ticketing, because it's not just an issue for Swansea, it's an issue right across Wales and probably through the UK. And we want to have a simple system, much about what Cardiff Bus talked about, where you just pay once and you can just jump on any mode of transport. So that's really on the cards, and I know that is something that's being looked at. It's how it can be applied and how it can be utilised across Wales, not just Swansea. But that's certainly something that's on the cards. I don't know if, Kath, if I've skipped or missed anything important. I know there's plenty of time. I want to keep as much time for questions as I can without drawing on through the whole report.
Great, thanks, Mark. Kath, have you got anything to?
Not really. I think Councillor Thomas has covered everything that I wanted to say, I think. So set out there. And I think a lot of the things will come up in the questions. We've already seen some of the councillor questions, and I think some of that will be clarified at that point.
Great, thanks very much. I think it's important, and we talked about this at an earlier meeting, to get a regular bus service to all areas, to tackle residence isolation in some cases, because people who've given up driving, elderly people might have given up driving, need to get proper access to public transport, otherwise they become prisoners in their own home. We've got a number of questions and they've been circulated, I know. So the first one, could I ask Councillor Cheryl Philpott?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Possibly what I'm going to ask now, it brings in a number of the points that have already been made. The first part of I've need to look at the ecological aspect, and obviously the modal change has actually been mentioned on a number of occasions. And I know that you know, we've talked about active travel, but active travel is, the funding for that has been basically to make it safer for people to cycle and walk. But as you just said, Chair, not everybody is able to cycle and walk. We've got those elderly people or people who live perhaps in more that, you know, the topography of Swansea is hilly. That's, you know, we can't deny that in many places. So, you know, accessibility has to be a main point. And I think listening to Jane, and while I'm mentioning you, Jane, I have to say, can we just give a thanks to all of the bus drivers and the bus personnel, whether they've been private or working for, let's say, the First Cymru who support us in Swansea. Such a big vote of thanks, because they've carried on all the way through the pandemic, ensuring that people have had that transportation to get to work. And I think they are one of the unsung heroes as well. And I'd just like to say at the moment, thank you very much from me. And I'm sure that my colleagues will as well, you know, want to join with me in that. But going on, and that's it, isn't it? It's an important service. We need, if we're going to have that modal change, then public transport has to be the backbone of what we're going to do when we need to have that fast walking, cycling, fine, but when we need to have a transportation system that will actually get us from A to B in what is a timely, not even to mention comfortable, but a timely and regular manner, then that's what I think we all need to be working to. And I think just meetings like this are really helpful. And it was, you know, Jane, you mentioned, you know, committed to the region. And I think that's what we want to hear. And also perhaps working more closely with local councillors, because if we've identified, I mean, I put something parochial down in my question, it's about the 29 bus, that, you know, if we're looking to dovetail into council policy, we're looking to support local district centres. In Scrutiny, the main area where the main bus comes from, the 29 bus, doesn't actually go through the local district shopping centre. And we have had conversations with you, the conversations with Justin Davis, and I have to say, you know, he dismissed it without thought. So, and I think that it really does need, you know, more dialogue with you and other transportation companies to see where we can tweak things for the benefit of the residents, the shopkeepers. And I know that when we had a meeting prior to the public meeting today, this was something that we all thought of. There are areas that could do with a discussion, because it could well be that we can help you to increase that passenger number. Because that first question, the public question, meant it said about, you know, asking, it isn't the people who are on the buses, because you mentioned, Jane, you know, we can get feedback from the people on the buses. It's the people who don't actually catch the buses. Why aren't they catching the buses? And why are numbers diminishing? are we sort of capturing that? And I think those are two really important questions that we need to have to be able to work forward, but also to be looking, to be listening to local knowledge as well, to be able to take it forward. And I, you know, I would really like to see something on that basis. And again, I know Lyndon and Linda said they'd like to see you perhaps after at another time, and I'm sure that my two councillor colleagues here, David and Peter, would very much like to meet with you as well and perhaps take it forward. It's not the right platform today, but I do think there is merit in those discussions going forward. I think there was a little question I didn't there. So
great, thanks, Sharon.
Yeah.
Could we make the questions perhaps a little shorter? Some of the answers might have already come up, but otherwise we're not going to get through the questions. And I can see Councillor Chris Lay has got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know obviously what Councillor Philpott was saying there wasn't really relating to Cardiff. However, as a local councillor who actually doesn't drive and very much relies on the bus network to get to and from work, it's really important. It's really important that we really should advertise actually how quick it does actually take from like getting into, for example, where I am in St Mellons, into somewhere like Cardiff city centre. So it only takes me 25 minutes to get into the city centre. Now, if I was to do that in peak time in a car, I know fair well that it would take me a lot longer. But we've got the infrastructure. We've got the infrastructure going down our Newport Road, the bus lanes and things like that to get actually into the city centre. Does it need improving? Yes, it absolutely does need improving. You know, can we get it more quicker and efficient? Yeah, we can. You know, but it's about actually publicising what we are doing right about public transport. And I think that's really important and key to actually getting new customers actually back on and get onto public transport. So, for example, the coaster service, which obviously First are doing at the moment down with yourselves, we're also doing a service ourselves going from the city centre down to Penarth Pier, which is also open top deck. It's a great opportunity for the people who actually wouldn't normally catch a bus to actually get onto something which is exciting as like an open top deck bus, to actually go down. Okay, we need a bit of sunshine and a bit of better weather than what we're getting at the moment, but the point is that we need to use these opportunities wisely, but we do also need to use the infrastructure which we've got there. And we also, as local councillors, we're the best voice to get it out there, because I have many a resident in my ward come to me and say it takes forever to get into Cardiff on a bus. And I am the perfect example to turn around and say, you're not talking correctly there. You're not telling me what I witness every single day, you know. And when you've got that answer for them, that's when they backtrack and they go like, oh, actually, yeah, but, and it's like, no, this is what I see every day, you know. And I think if more councillors actually use the public transport themselves to get to and from meetings and to and from work, then I think we're the best advertisement for it. And we as board members of Cardiff Bus, that's what we try and do. But that's just from my opinion from a Cardiff point of view.
Great, thanks, Chris. Mark and Jane, would you like to come in with that?
I've only got one comment, Chair. But just to add to what was said there now is Christopher said. It's quite a fair point. I mean, the local bus from where I live, from Penclough into Swansea City Centre, takes something like 37 minutes. Anybody I speak to in Penclough will tell me that the bus, they don't catch a bus because it takes an hour. It doesn't. I mean, I do catch the bus. I do enjoy the journey on the bus, actually, because you know, anyway. But it's 37 minutes. But the perception is that it's an hour, and that perception puts off people even trying to catch the bus, because if they believe it's an hour, they're not going to even try to catch it. So it's winning those people over, and it is the hearts and minds game, and it is, as Christopher said, yeah, we're the best advocates, but I think it needs more than that as well. It needs more than just my voice in my ward to persuade all these people. So, again, I'm not being critical, but I don't think we publicise the buses often enough, and as Chris has said, the benefits of them. And there's this belief that, like one of the questions, a public question came in and said it costs £5 to go into the city centre. Well, I suppose it depends where you're coming from, but the majority of journeys don't cost £5. But if your perception is that it's £5 and it's going to take an hour, if you believe that, then you're not even going to try the buses. So I suppose, but as I said, in regard to the core of the question that Cheryl was asking, maybe Jane would want to comment on that.
Jane. Hello. Jane,
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Philpott, actually, and we'd be keen to talk with you about the Service 29, particularly about growing the patronage, because as I've already indicated, that is a real challenge to many of our bus services. So yeah, we'd be more than happy to take that offline with you and look at working with many of you to find ways of enhancing the knowledge to your residents and constituents of the services that we have in the area.
Great, thanks. Could we go on to the next question? And that's Councillor Chris Holly.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as quick as I possibly can. Many of the questions have been asked. I think there's two questions I would like to ask out of those, though. Is one about the accountancy for subsidy to the bus services is done on an open book basis. That's the first one. A question to First Bus, and that is with regards to bus lanes. You know, we all know the bus lanes actually improve the speed of traffic, the speed of the journeys, etc. What's your view on that? And can I ask about Cardiff Bus? How do you set your fees? Your fares, sorry. Is it done across the city, or is it a cross subsidy or whatever? Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Chris. Jane, do you want to go in first, and then Gavin? Jane. Yeah. You're on silent.
Okay. So in terms of, thank you. So if I just cover the point about subsidy, can I just clarify your question there, Councillor Holly? Are you talking about the concessionary scheme? Because as we've indicated, there are only a small number.
If we subsidise. We'll say if we subsidise the trip from Swansea to Penclouth, how is the subsidy worked out? Is it done on an open book basis, or do you tell the council we want 46 pence per passenger or £1.56 per passenger because there's only 20 people on the bus and it costs us X amount to travel to operate that bus? That's the question, and that's how I'd like you to answer it.
Do you want me to answer that from the council's point of view, Jane, first?
Yeah, fair enough, Kath, but I would like to hear from First Bus.
And as we said in our report, where there are gaps in the commercial network, then the council can put on services which are socially necessary. And the way that is done is that the council then devises the timetable and puts the specification out, which has to go to open tender. That has to be done under the Transport Act 85. And what happens then is that the bus operators will submit a price for operating the service exactly as we specified. In Swansea, usually they get to keep the revenue they collect on the bus, and we subsidise that particular service, and it's that bit on its own. So when the bus companies are submitting their tender prices, they take into account the amount of revenue they estimate they're going to get on the bus. And then we get the tender prices and we determine then who the successful tenderer is and who will operate that contract for us. That's the way. Now, how the bus companies price up that, Jane perhaps can answer, but that's the way it works for us.
I was aware of that, Kat, but I would like him to answer the question if you don't
Okay,
mind.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Councillor, what we would do, if we bid in for work from the local authority, look at the cost in that service. So we base that on the vehicle, the driver, the number of driving hours, and things like fuel and maintenance costs. So they are the items that we would cost to submit a tender proposition to the local authority.
Right, and is that per?
So it's purely on our costs.
That is per journey.
Well, it would depend on the contract, the stipulation of the contract submitted from the local authority. So it wouldn't tend to be journey, it would tend to be on the basis of the whole of the service provision.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councillor Gavin Hill-John.
Yeah, I think just answering the basis how we price our routes, they're purely done on a commercial basis in line with, we still have to be in the black, so we have to charge fairly, and we look at our competitors, we look at our own internal costs, and we come up with a price. As simple as that.
That being the case, how do you measure your competitors? If Cardiff Bus is the only bus company in Cardiff,
we're not the only one. Sorry,
no,
Chris.
But how do you measure it against your competitors, if you don't mind me asking?
So we don't intend to be the cheap. We have a number of competitors, Stagecoach, we've got Nat as well. So we look at the routes that they operate, and they tend to operate our more profitable routes, should we say. So they will target particular routes, and we compare our prices to theirs, and we go from there. Is that what you meant in terms of?
Yes.
Yeah. So although we are the dominant operator, we're not the only operator. So, for example, to give you a very specific example, one of our most profitable routes is from Ely on the outskirts of Cardiff into the centre of Cardiff, and that is then also run by Nat, and they run an X1 service, so they go through there. We also have profitable routes that come through Whitchurch, so from the north of Cardiff, and if you stand at a bus stop in Whitchurch in Cardiff, you've got a bus every 30-40 seconds, and it can be 3 or 4 different operators.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
great. Thank you very much. Councillor Peter Jones. You're on silent. Oh, there we are.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Okay, I chair the Council's Natural Environment Performance Panel. So I've got a particular interest, amongst many other considerations, with air quality. And indeed, in a meeting of the panel only a week ago, we looked at this in some detail, as Councillor Thomas will be aware, and had a very useful discussion, including a presentation from a researcher at Swansea University. And of course, it's well known that at the UK level, air quality is estimated to be responsible for something like 40,000 deaths per annum, 40,000 deaths per annum. So it's quite a serious consideration, with an estimated associated cost of something like £20 billion per annum, particularly presumably to the National Health Service, to meet that particular concern. So I was very pleased to learn from the 2 presentations that First Bus are committed to becoming what was described as a clean air operator by 2035, and to cease all new diesel purchases after 2025. And that's obviously an important recognition of the need to switch away from polluting fossil fuels towards cleaner forms of engine provision. And I was very impressed, incidentally, from the Cardiff Bus side to see the commitment to beginning to introduce a full fleet, or significant fleet, of electric vehicles over the period going ahead. And that is something that I would like to see happen as soon as possible, therefore, here in Swansea. But a particular point I want to make, therefore, is in relation I have family down in Exeter, and they and I use Exeter City Bus to run their services down there. And one of the interesting findings that I learned from travelling on Exeter City Bus, so I noticed it directly, when they stop at a set of traffic lights, red traffic lights, the driver switches off the engine and then waits until green, then starts up his engine again and moves on. And I understand that this is a formal requirement that Exeter City Bus has imposed on its drivers. And of course, the benefit from doing this is to cut polluting emissions in the cities, roads and so forth. So I'm just wondering, certainly in relation, I suppose it's a question for First Bus to Jane, I guess, here in Swansea. Is this something your company has thought about? And would it be something you would be prepared to introduce? And I would stress that there are some specific bus lanes in Exeter, but most of their buses are running on the open road, so to speak. And I can understand there might be an argument about delay, but from an emissions point of view, this would be a tremendous step to take. So Jane, I'd welcome your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Firstly, I'd say we do have a number of vehicles that have what is described as stop-start technology, and it's the sort of things you get on modern cars, that once you stop, an auxiliary battery kicks in, and then that means that the idler is reduced, and then it restarts when the accelerator is deployed again. In of the piece around switching the engine off, I would need to talk to my engineering colleagues about that, because when you switch a bus off, it does take some time then for things to kick back in, and I would be concerned about how long it would take to do that, which could delay the flow of the traffic and cause some additional factors. But I'd be happy to take that offline and give you a thorough response to that question. But be assured that the technology for buses is improving significantly. Can I just cover the point about the electric buses? I think we need to be clear, and perhaps Councillor, our colleague from Cardiff could add to this. I believe some of the vehicles that are going into other parts of Wales have been funded through the Department for Transport bids, and that's because of areas that are defined as clean air zones, and we haven't got those areas within our operating company. That means that we've been able to bid for such vehicles, but we are committed to look into alternative fuel vehicles in the future. But I understand those areas that have done that through government funding so far.
Yeah, so we were able to put a bid together. It required significant investment from ourselves, but there is funding externally through the transport network as well, and from Welsh Government. So yeah, that is part of it. So I can confirm that, Jane.
Could I just check?
Thank you ever so much. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't 100%. Thank you.
Yeah.
What is the
position? Come back quickly on the point about bus drivers switching off their engines when waiting at lights or for any other reason, including under conditions of congestion. Again, from my direct personal experience, I can reassure Jane that stopping and starting again at traffic lights, at least, there was no obvious delay. It was very quick, very swift, and therefore I would urge her with her engineers and whoever to have a look at this, because there is the potential for a major saving in terms of emissions, and also particularly, of course, when conditions of congestion and delay, again, for drivers to switch off their engines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Stuart Davis has got his hand up, and then we'll go on to the questions from Councillor Mike White.
Yeah, just really going back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the metro and things. We're working very closely with Welsh Government and Transport for Wales in trying to secure funding for a number of improvements, and low emission bus vehicles are certainly one of the things which is very high on the agenda. So whether that's electric or hydrogen fueling, we're certainly working very closely with them on that. So hopefully we'll be in a position to secure some funding in the not too distant future.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I'd like to my question really is regards to accepting tickets of other operators. I'll give you an example. The area I live comes through past Brynavred and through to Manston, and we got three different. We've got Uber service, we've got Southwest Transport and NAT. They come through the area providing a service. Yet, if people who haven't got a concessionary pass have got to pay a fare, and if they buy the ticket on your bus, and if they come back home or vice versa on another company, they can't use that ticket. They've got to purchase another ticket. Why can't why can't these cross tickets be accepted by all the operators? I think that's totally unjust. Secondly, I believe there is scope for areas to be extended in regards to circular routes, because we don't have customer numbers and passengers, and I'm sure if we could look at certainly improving circular routes, this would help improve the services. And thirdly, just if you could give a possible comparator, what would be the price of a 2-mile journey in Cardiff compared to Swansea?
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Jane, do you want to kick off?
Yes, so if I start with the multi-operator ticket scenario, Councillor White, you'll be happy to know this is really seriously up the agenda of Transport for Wales and Welsh Government, and some of the challenges to this is the fact that we don't have clear systems that all operators use. So ticket machines are very different. So in terms of how do you then split out the revenue is one of the very significant challenges. So one of the things that Transport for Wales and Welsh Government are keen to do is to improve the offering to all bus companies to have consistent ticket machines and be able to have multi-operator and integrated transport ticketing between bus and rail. So I think that is something we will see introduced as part of the proposition that Welsh Government and Transport for Wales are wanting to see as part of bus reform. In terms of circular routes, I'd be keen to understand more about that, and I think it's one of the things again that we would probably need to take offline. If there are suggestions on how we do that, of course we'd be very happy to hear from you and look at how we could build that into the network if that did deliver us an improved patronage position. So more than happy to hear your representations from that. In terms of the journey cost differences between ourselves in Swansea and Cardiff, it would be very difficult to answer that question without doing a lot of digging. But I have had a quick look, and in terms of our daily ticket offering in Swansea versus Cardiff, we are about 60 pence cheaper on a day ticket in Swansea than Cardiff bus. Sorry to highlight that to you, Gavin, but that's my initial very quick observation. But we would need to do a lot more detailed work to get you a full comprehensive response on that question.
Yeah, no problem at all, Jane. I think we're about £3.80 for a day ticket, and I'm sure you've worked that out. But I think what you've got to remember there is it's very difficult to look at a 2-mile journey, because we all offer sort of in effect deals where we're trying to get people to a weekly ticket or a day pass or things like that, because we want to make it as cost effective for people as possible and to encourage as many people as possible to use the services. So I think that's there, and I would echo Jane's comments regarding the kind of model that Transport for Wales will be looking at in terms of single tickets across all of the networks, and probably including rail as well. That is, as Jane has already said, that's very high on the agenda, and I'm sure in the next few years we're going to see some development on that going forward.
Great, thank you very much. Could I ask next question, Councillor Paul Lloyd?
Thank you, Chair. A number of my points or questions have been answered earlier about profit levels, etc. So I won't go back to that. But following on from what Cheryl said, actually, earlier, Councillor Philpott, it's about the services that we do provide and how we could maximise them, and obviously then stabilise the system and increase patronage, etc. And some of the things I put in my points there is that when there are possibilities of increasing patronage and then increasing the service, they're staring us in the face sometimes. And I have actually in the past, to the predecessor, when Justin Davis was in charge there, emailed him many times, and it's just nothing done. And some of the examples I gave in our briefing previously was there's no connecting up between train and bus. We've got train stations around the city, and then the bus doesn't even get to the station in some cases. And in my case, we have Llansamlet station. Buses are not meeting with the trains. I gave an example last week of a train pulled in on its way to Manchester, and as it's pulling out, the bus appears. I mean, can we not coordinate these things? And where it has worked, I mean, I came home Brighton to Llansamlet, and within minutes was on a bus going home. That's how it should be. But when we had Mike touched earlier on the circular service, we had what was First Cymru's 43. It went via High Street Station, but a minute before mainline train pulled out. So it just was useless. It was pointless. So what I'm saying is, can we please examine where we could coordinate services so that they maximise? I mean, I was suggesting hubs whereby these train stations, etc., become a transport hub as well. In some cases, there'll be very little need to do anything other than put coordinate the timetables. Again, I know I've been parochial, but I mean, the 33 turns round a few hundred yards from Llansamlet station. Why can't it terminate at the station? And then that doubles the service passing there at no extra cost. It's little things like that. And then in terms of, I'm not talking about Swansea, but I was in another part of Wales last weekend, and I just had to walk away. It was disgusting. Tea services, one appeared going down the main coast. It was waiting. Another one appeared, went round the block, and as it pulled in behind the other tea service, the first one pulled away. And that was the possibilities. This was my example. The possibilities of joining up one part of West Wales with a mainline train service was missed. And anyone waiting for that bus had to wait 59 minutes for another one. It's things like that frustrate people. And I can well understand it why people say, well, there's no point. I'm not going to catch the bus. I'll wait. I'll get somebody drop me off at the station. And that's where we're losing passengers. So, I mean, that's my plea, if you like, is can we sit down with train operators, with the local authorities, and get together? That could then lead. I had an example the other day of, yes, one ticket, bus and train, and one local authority has even added cycle hire. That's really forward thinking as far as I'm concerned. So wherever you were going, you had means of getting to your destination. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. Jane, and if you've got anything to add, Gavin.
Yeah, look, I would say that Paul, that is a frustration of ours, because we have worked with the train companies in the past to align our bus services to operate around train stations, and then the timetables have changed on the trains, and it is challenging to do that. You know, we do have 60 buses that go past the main train station in High Street every hour, so that is a significant number. I do take on board your point about the smaller stations, but one of the things I would say is that many of the small stations don't have the infrastructure that means we can turn buses safely. And where we have seen transport hubs introduced, we have one in Port Talbot, actually, not on your patch, I appreciate, but it hasn't attracted the volume of people to board the bus or alight the bus that we expected. Now, of course, these things do have to go hand in hand, and I can absolutely assure you that Transport for Wales are committed to having this integrated transport solution, and we will do everything we can to work with them to work on this agenda moving forward, because I'm sure I've said it a number of times, we're very committed to improve the customer offering on our services, and we, bearing in mind where we are with the pandemic, it's vital that we do that in partnership, not only with Transport for Wales, but with yourselves. And if you have feedback, then I'm more than happy to hear that, so we can go and test it and work harder to find the solutions for customers in the area.
Great, thank you very much. Gavin, do you want to comment there then? Councillor Mark Thomas.
No, the only thing, I think Jane's covered that in terms of it's the Transport for Wales agenda. That's really what we all need to be doing as operators and council, is engaging with Transport for Wales and using that body to influence the structure going forward, because that's where that change will become. It's very difficult as an individual operator to align yourselves all the time, because again, it's just changes can happen at a local level. As Jane said, it's the infrastructure surrounding some of these stations as well. You know, it takes a big amount of space to turn a bus around. It's not something you can just sort of do. So it's got to be a holistic approach across Wales, really. So I would encourage that relationship with Transport for Wales.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark.
Yes, thanks, Jan. To echo the comments here from Jane and Gavin, is there's a lot of hope and expectation on the shoulders of Transport for Wales that there is going to be a significant change. I think I'm very hopeful that we are going to see change, because the fact that now Transport for Wales are responsible for these services brings it under one umbrella effectively, and it can't be done just in Swansea. You can't it's very difficult to make network changes. So if we look for bus to connect with rail, or rail to connect with bus, it needs a regional approach to that, and we will see, as sure as I'm sitting here, we're going to see changes. But one point I wanted to make a particular reference to, I know Councillor Lloyd mentioned hubs, just to remind everybody, in a report we have had funding from Welsh Government for feasibility studies. I know it's early days yet, because we are looking to create that in Gowerton and in Pontarddulais, for the very reasons that Councillor Lloyd mentioned and Jane mentioned. Buses can't get down to the station in Gowerton, as we all know, most of us who are very familiar with the area, and that puts off people catching the bus, because it's you've got to walk to the station for most people, and if you've got mobility issues or disability issues. So there is, we have the opportunity to look at options to sort of make that much more accessible by bus, and make it much more accessible for all. And it shows there is, since they changed the line there, and it stops both sides and regular stops, the patronage on the trains, I think when they revamped Gowerton Station, went up something like 130%. So if you improve the station itself, which Network Rail did, and then you improve the access to it, then that's the next stage. And so, and I'm very confident that once we're able to do that sort of thing, because you've got to make it, as I said, accessible for people. The buses are accessible, the trains are accessible, but the journey to and from, and the interchange between the two, has to be very accessible as well. And those are things that we are going to see improving. I'm very confident about that.
Great, thank you very much. Stuart Davis has got his hand up, and then we must bring questions to a close, because we've got to discuss any comments that we want to make. Stuart.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'm in fear of sounding like a stuck record going on about the metro and the metro work, but yeah, I mean, Councillor Lloyd has hit on the things which are absolutely fundamental to it. The integration in terms of between rail, between bus, between active travel, they're really kind of cornerstones of what the metro is looking to try and achieve. So that issue of having potentially, certainly cycle hire, electric bike hire and things at the hubs, at the interchange points between station, and the buses time in to try and get there with the rail is certainly something. And there's also high quality interchange. So if people are having to wait for 10 minutes because it's not possible to exactly coordinate them, they've got good high quality sort of facilities to wait in, and so all these things are certainly going to be progressed as part of the metro, but there is advanced work going on in advance of it. And we're also working with TFW and on looking at bus routings and different things, network reviews. We work closely with Jane and the team through the partnership sort of arrangements to try and tease out the problems that are brought forward as well. So yeah, hopefully it will certainly get there in the future on that.
Great, thanks. Could I take this opportunity to thank Jane from First Cymru, Chris and Gavin from Cardiff Bus, Mark, Stuart and Kath from the council for their contributions and for joining us. Really grateful. And thank you so much.
Lyndon, can I just make one final comment?
Sorry, who was that? Sorry,
it's Gavin. Can I just make
Gavin? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Final comment. I was just going to say before we depart and leave on. I know you've got a lot to do. But I think if you really want to change the bus sort of services in Swansea, I just encourage the council to adopt the mindset of trying to help Jane move her buses around as easily as possible. One of the big things that you can change, you can look at different models, but to grow patronage, you need reliability. People need to know they can get a bus at a time and it's going to be on time every time. So the more you can do in your infrastructure and moving the buses around, the easier it will be for Jane to put more people on those buses. Remember that stat at the beginning that we both shared, 75 cars off the road with one bus. So okay, that would be my parting comment. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm afraid we're going to have to now go on to the discussion and conclusions with the group, Stuart. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night.
All I was going to say about was we do have the late bus, which is late bus system, which is there to give that priority through junctions, and we're absolutely looking at congestion hotspots and investing a lot of money in terms of getting reliability. So I'll say no more. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Right, everyone. Thanks for the questions and everybody's contributions. Really grateful. We now have to discuss some conclusions arising from the session to include in the letter that I then send off to Mark. Does anybody want to kick off?
Yeah, can I?
Sure, Chris, yes.
Couple of things. First of all, I was very interested in the fact that the comments about the bus lanes, our friend from First Bus didn't answer the question, because they were the ones that pushed for bus lanes, and when they were taken out, they didn't object to them. So I think there's an issue that we've got. If they want to improve reliability, because we haven't got the same road structure they got in many other cities, we have to build bus lanes, and that was part of the issue, which I can't get over. That the way in which they failed to answer the question. I think the other thing is we have to accept that because of the very nature of the way Swansea is built, we only have 3 entrances and 3 exits, because we've got the sea on one side, whereas Cardiff is far more inland than we are. So our congestion points are always going to be an issue about reliability. So that's why I say about the bus lanes. I was quite interested in hearing what Cardiff Bus had to say about fares, comparing them with their competition. So that proves to me that they are they're running a competitive bus service with other companies, as opposed to actually trying to get more people on the buses by having a cross subsidy with parking, etc. And finally, I was a bit concerned that the report we had from the council didn't come up with anything that we didn't know, and I was quite surprised at that. I thought we've been looking at hubs in the various areas of Swansea, from Pontedilais, Gosainan, Clydach, Morriston, and there used to be a bus terminus in Morriston by the Red Lion, opposite the fire station. And you know, I would have thought that would have been discussed. I know it was discussed years ago, so I'm a bit surprised that we are still having feasibility study about it. I think if in the letter we need to say there needs, if anyone wants a modal change on how they're going to do it, they better start listening to elected members and people, and like Councillor Paul Lloyd, who knows far more about the bus service than I would dare say some of the people working in First Bus now.
Certainly, I found that Paul certainly knows a lot about buses. I've learned quite a few things from him in the two meetings that certainly that we've had. Any other comments from anyone? Obviously, we can include a lot of the obviously some of the questions that we used, and we can, you know, formalize. I get formalized answers. But anything anybody would like to add? We got a couple of names up. Nick, Councillor Nick Davis.
Thank you. I don't think my camera is working, but can you hear me?
Absolutely, yeah.
I thought this was a meeting in which nearly all the comments that were made I agreed with, but the slightly disquieting part of it is that I remember when I was on a scrutiny committee in about 2012-13, we produced a report which went into many of the same problems and had many of the same discussions and came up with many of the same conclusions. That's not to say that those points that were made today are not absolutely correct, but I mean, it almost feels like it's a case of Groundhog Day. You know, we've been here before, and many of the same problems, the problems of ticketing, the problems of perception that the buses are worse than they are, the issue of we don't just talk to people who use the buses, we talk to people who don't use the buses because they think they're no good. All the stuff, all those arguments, we've had them before, and so, you know, part of me thinks, yes, this is really good that we're talking about this, but the other half of me thinks, well, we've been talking about it for a while, and as they say around the posh parts of Swansea, plus ça change, plus la même chose, or in other words, it's Groundhog Day. So, you know, I'm supportive of all the points that are made, but I think we you know, the modal shift, it's not something that we can really hang around, because I think the planet and our health won't wait for us.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Paul Lloyd.
Just thank you, Lyndon, and thank you very much for your chairing of these meetings. Just one for Chris, really. We talk about the services that terminated at the Red Lion. Yeah, I can remember all them. The only one that would now, but it doesn't, is the 36, and it goes down to Castle Bingo, round a roundabout and back up. That's why. The services that did terminate, one was from our part of the world, the 31, now goes up to Morriston Hospital. So there's little changes have taken place. So I can understand that, and I again echo what Nick said. Please, you know, let's have something done about this report, and I hope the goodwill is there within the authority to do this, because people do want to travel by public transport. I mean, I got family all over the country. I do not want to drive there. I'd much prefer to go by bus, coach, train, plane, whatever. But then it's coordinated. You know, when I go to, my niece lives in Edinburgh, my brother's in the Midlands, I can get off the plane and there's a regular service to go to my niece's place in Edinburgh, and that's the way it should be locally. Just, I mean, I know I'm keeping on, but I go back. Chris, you mentioned about bus lanes and all that. I guess you'll remember we were on the authority. I was chair of transportation, And we spent hundreds of thousands on bus corridors, we call them. One was the A48, being parochial again, from Port Talbot in our part of the world. It started at junction 44, the A48, a bus corridor, because then there was a service, Port Talbot to Porthcawl, Port Talbot, Llansamlet, Llanelli. No, we did all that. Then at the same time, we were putting in these raised curbs and new bus shelters all around for the new kneel-in buses so that everyone could use the services. Now, you know what I'm going to say next. Guess what happened? The bus company took those services off. Yeah. So you got your A48 down through Pennell Green. I can't remember now what it cost, but it was silly money. There isn't a bus down there. Right? And that's what's, it's so frustrating.
Paul, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. It's just absolutely bonkers. I got a bus shelter down the road from me here that we installed. They took the service off. It's still there. I'm not going to shout because we may want to use it, but I mean that's how maddening this is and frustrating because of deregulation, because we got no control over the system. I mean, so the sooner we get this message across and we do something serious about it, because that's what's putting people off.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Councillor Mike White. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think what would be important as well, as I touched on earlier, is also, because we've got quite a few operators in City Council Swansea, about the actual timetables of the routes, because I'll give you an example. The buses coming via Morriston Way, come through Runner's Square. You've got a 36, a 24 and a 35. They all arrive within 5 minutes of each other. So if you miss one, you've got half an hour or even an hour's wait. So why can't these companies talk to one another and make sure that they have a staggered timetable which would be suitable for bus users? I think that needs to get, that point needs to be got across, Chair.
Okay, yeah, no, good point. Cheryl, you're next. You're on silent.
Oh, right, here we are.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, only briefly. I think the problem that we've got is that Jane was talking about commercial costs, etc., and whether it's feasible to run buses. If those buses then, for example, like the 14 down to Pennard, if the council then it's put to them to subsidise them, then obviously it becomes much more difficult, doesn't it? So I think there's got to be this move away from the commercial side of things into looking at how they do actually encourage people to use the buses so that they can get that more. And I think a number of us have said it. I was quite heartened that she did say that she would meet with us, which Justin Davis hasn't or wouldn't. I know that you got on all right with him, Linda, and I know that Linda did as well. But, I think we all need to be meeting with Jane, and it's apparent from the number of conversations we've had that there are a number of bus users within this committee. I mean, David and I quite frequently catch buses, so we know what it's like. And I think when you do, it was as the gentleman from Cardiff said, when you know what it's like to catch a bus, you are able then to put that debate to people and say, well, no, because it isn't just the time of the bus, the time the bus takes. It's the convenience, if you were going for argument's sake to the city centre, that you can then get off at the city centre, go straight into the quadrant. We won't cloud it with what we've got in the quadrant or not at the moment, but you're there. You haven't got to walk to a car park, pay for the car park, and then walk from that car park back to where you actually want to go to. So, many of the out of town shopping areas have got bus stops right outside. You get off the bus, you do your shopping, you get back on the bus, you go back home. So it is that integrated and coordinated transport. And I don't think we need anything grand to do this. I just think all of us sitting down and talking to First Cymru will have a hugely beneficial effect.
Okay, great, thanks. And obviously these can form part of the recommendations to Mark Thomas. Peter,
Yes,
you're
thank you.
still with us. I hope you're
Yes, I've survived. Thank you.
Such a stimulating meeting, see, Peter.
Oh, it was so exciting. I
Right
couldn't.
at the start.
No, but the point I wanted to make, if I may, climate change and greening. I think quite a significant part of the discussion that we had with both of the bus companies emphasised the importance of cutting fossil fuel emissions, and the whole issue of air pollution, protecting and improving air quality, and so on and so forth. So I'd just like to suggest that as an overriding, or one of the overriding themes of our response, we should emphasise the point that of the importance of bus companies and transport more generally contributing to carbon emission reduction. I mean, at the moment, I'll bore you for a second, at the moment, global carbon emissions are running at 420 parts per million CO2. By 2030, at the present rate, it will be 440, and by 2050, it will be 480. When I worked for the RSPB, we were told by climate scientists that anything greater than 400 would probably deliver catastrophe globally. Well, here we are, 420, heading towards 440 and so on. So I just think we should make that an important overriding statement that we are expecting our bus companies to move quickly and radically away from fossil fuels. I mean, we were told that first would be clean air, as they called it, by 2035. 2035, can't they move a bit more quickly than that and at least try to deliver that by 2030, so that they're making a contribution in line with Swansea City Council's commitment to being net zero by 2030. So just my point. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Any other points, or are there any things you'd like me to highlight to the Scrutiny Programme Committee from this session?
I think one thing that does come up from what Nick and Paul has said is the fact that we have been here before, and I think that we should say to the Scrutiny Programme Committee, and we should actually say to the Cabinet member, we reconvene this group in 6 months to see what improvements or what changes have been made, and then as a result of that, then we'll decide whether we meet in 6 months after that again. And I do believe that if we don't keep the pressure on, nothing will happen.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. Good. Okay, thanks, Chris. Any comments anybody else would like to make? Liz has been taking notes throughout, and I'll be having a chat with her later. But could I then, in conclusion, we're 3 minutes over, but could I thank everybody for their contributions, and very pleased, for the people who turned up as well from Cardiff Bus, from First Cymru buses, and from the council to contribute. And thank you all very much. Bye.
Thank you all.